"You're just the janitor. Don't touch that Steinway." The words came sharp, cutting through the marble silence of the school's atrium like they were meant to echo. The billionaire's cufflinks gleamed in the light as he turned back to the camera crew, setting up for the televised fundraiser. He hadn't even looked at Evan when he said it, but Evan didn't move, not yet. His left hand remained resting on the grand piano's rim, thumb brushing the slight give in the key he'd just noticed. The give wasn't visible. You had to feel it. You had to know it. "I wasn't going to scratch it," Evan said calmly. "I was going to keep it from choking mid-performance. It's overdue." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff out his chest. Just that one sentence, clinical, quiet, almost bored. Alaric Vale finally turned his full gaze on him. "What did you say?" Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. The hallway stilled. No one said anything. Then the headmistress rushed in with her clipboard and apology and ushered Evan out like a stain on the staging. The camera lights followed Alaric. The mop bucket squeaked behind Evan. Just a janitor. Just a man in a uniform. He didn't argue. He just walked. Evan Marshall had spent the last 6 years making himself small. Quiet corners, early mornings. He worked the private academy's floors like a ghost, clean, invisible, easy to ignore. He never corrected anyone when they assumed he was a new hire or a night shift fill-in. He didn't flinch when the students whispered or when the teachers skipped hellos. Because every hour he worked here, his daughter got one more chance. Sophie, 14. Skin too soft for this world, hands too gentle for fight. She was small too, by choice. Her gift wasn't her voice, it was her music. She played like she was hiding inside every note. The piano gave her language, and the scholarship here gave her a stage. But stages like these, they didn't like janitor fathers, especially not when they tried to touch the school's 100-year-old Steinway. "Dad," she whispered that evening as he handed her lunch wrapped in foil, "you didn't embarrass me. I swear she meant it. She always meant it." But her eyes said something else, and Evan had learned to hear the difference. He used to be someone, once, a man called for by name across cities and stages, a master of fine-tuned silence and balance. He'd adjusted pianos for philharmonics, tightened bolts beside prodigies. He could tune pitch by touch, but that was another lifetime, before cancer, before caregiver burnout, before widower grief turned everything into survival. Now he adjusted mops, floors, schedules, and, occasionally, tension rods, quietly, when no one saw. That Steinway was slipping. He felt it last week. That choke he'd mentioned, it would happen. Not because he wanted to prove something, but because old instruments always showed their ghosts right when you needed them most. The problem wasn't the piano, it was pride. Pride never listened. And Alaric Vale. That man wore pride like his watch. Custom, polished, and set 3 minutes ahead, just to make everyone else late. Evan returned to the janitor's closet and pulled the door behind him. His toolkit, the toolkit, sat on the top shelf where no one touched it. Not even Sophie. Polished cherry wood with old velvet lining. No label, no brand, only memory. He opened it, brushed the dust away, counted the tools, 12, still perfect, just in case. In the gala prep room, Alaric made another phone call, his voice curt and clipped as he adjusted Lena's schedule. His niece had a condition, something like performance anxiety, though he refused to call it that. She needed silence, routine, everything tuned to her pulse, and the school had promised that. "They're already rehearsing in there," he snapped. "Get that kid out." Sophie was halfway through a scale when the assistant interrupted. "Sorry, the room's reserved for Miss Vale." Sophie nodded, packed up, didn't argue. Evan watched her from across the courtyard, piano case in hand, shoulders tight, eyes dimmed. "Where are you watching from?" Because what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't revenge. It was what happens when a man who once handled instruments worth more than the car Alaric stepped out of each morning decides he won't let his daughter fold herself small for someone else's comfort. It was just one key, just one night, just one piano no one thought he could touch. But that billionaire, he'd chosen the wrong janitor to dismiss. The next morning, the atrium was being polished for perfection. Gold-plated placards stood by every door. The red carpet for the donor walk had already been rolled out, lined with fresh orchids and LED runners to make it shimmer under the chandelier light. Evan moved through it like air, gloved hands, mop in rhythm, earpiece tucked out of sight. He preferred it that way. Clean spaces, clean silence, until the headmistress's heels snapped through that silence. "Mr. Marshall," he straightened slowly. "Ma'am, please avoid the music room today. The technicians from Harmonia Studios are coming in at noon to prep the Steinway for Lena Vale's rehearsal." He nodded. "Understood." Her voice turned sharper. "And please refrain from advising anyone regarding school instruments. Alaric was unsettled yesterday." Unsettled. That was one word for it. He hadn't raised his voice, but the look, the kind that decided which men ate in boardrooms and which mopped the tiles, had lingered longer than words. "Copy that," Evan replied, then returned to his work. But he couldn't stop thinking about the sound he'd heard during Sophie's practice session 2 days ago. A slight metallic echo under the left pedal. That wasn't normal. It desisto wasn't wear, it was friction. A support post was warping. Probably humidity in the stage risers, not visible. But it would make the bass keys stick during a dynamic run. On stage, that kind of failure wasn't just embarrassing. It could wreck a performance. He thought about telling them, then remembered the headmistress's eyes. No one would believe the janitor could hear something they couldn't. So, he didn't say a word. Instead, he turned, left the atrium, and made his way to the practice wing. Sophie wasn't there. She was skipping her morning rehearsal. Again. He found her sitting cross-legged behind the science lab, earbuds in, sketching scales into the corner of her notebook. "I didn't get kicked out," she said without looking up. "I just figured Miss Vale would need the space." "You're allowed to practice, Sophie." "I know." A shrug. "But she's like a genius. She plays like she's not even real." He knelt beside her. "So do you. You just play like you're hiding. There's a difference." She blinked at him. "You mad?" "No." "Embarrassed?" He laughed softly. "I've been called worse by better people." Her lip twitched, almost a smile. "Besides," he added, "I've played with people like her. Talent isn't everything. Trust is. Trust in the instrument, the silence between notes, yourself." She finally looked at him. "You've played with people like her?" Pause. "I used to fix their instruments. Close enough." He left it there. She didn't press, but her brow furrowed like she wanted to. In the meantime, Lena Vale's entourage began arriving. Nutritionist, assistant, stage coordinator. The school's security staff rerouted students away from the main hall. A velvet rope appeared around the Steinway. The technicians from Harmonia arrived, all buttoned shirts and brand logo cases. They examined the piano under Alaric's watchful eye, checking hammer felts, tuning pins, dampers. A show, a surface-level service. They didn't open the resonance shelf. They didn't test the low A with pedal pressure. Evan watched from the far hallway, carrying a bucket past a maintenance door, just wide enough to catch the sound. The bass was still off. No one noticed, except the girl sitting silently in the second row of the auditorium. Lena. She wasn't watching the techs. She was watching the piano like it was an animal she'd tamed and didn't quite trust anymore. Her fingers tapped out phantom keystrokes on her knees. Her breathing was too shallow. Sophie walked in quietly and sat down 2 seats away. No music, just her presence. They didn't speak, but Evan noticed that Lena's shoulders lowered slightly when Sophie sat beside her. That evening, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Lena had refused to finish her rehearsal. Something about the piano being wrong. The techs insisted everything was fine. Alaric was furious. The headmistress assured him the piano had been fully serviced. Evan walked the long way to the maintenance room, passing the supply closet he hadn't opened in weeks. He hesitated, then opened it. The cherry wood kit gleamed under a strip of flickering light. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He just closed the door gently, like sealing a secret. Back in the parking lot, Evan found Sophie waiting by their old truck. She was tracing the ridges in a worn-out practice book, one he'd salvaged from a thrift store years ago. Her breath fogged the air. The sky had turned lavender, folding night over the academy's gates. "She's scared," Sophie said quietly. Lena, she plays so perfect, but I think she's scared it'll break, like she only knows how to be good if the piano's perfect. Evan said nothing, but in his mind, he saw the stress crack forming under the harp plate, saw it not as wood and string, but as something more fragile than either girl would ever admit. He started the engine. Tomorrow would be rehearsal again. Tomorrow, the crack would grow. And tomorrow, someone would need to know how to fix what power couldn't. The next morning, Evan arrived before sunrise. The school courtyard was still cloaked in haze, dew clinging to marble benches and glass doors. He liked it best then, when everything was quiet enough to hear his own thoughts, and the building hadn't yet remembered to start judging him. He went through his checklist mechanically: floors, trash, restrooms, air filters, all before the admin offices opened. But his mind wasn't on the checklist. It was on that piano. It had been nagging him in the background, like a whisper through a wall. The low-end resonance was unstable. The vibrations would lag just enough to break the timing. You wouldn't notice if you were just listening, but if you played it, if your whole body was tuned into the balance of sound and silence, it would feel like betrayal. And for someone like Lena Vale, that kind of betrayal would look like failure. At 6:37 a.m., Evan passed by the auditorium again. The Steinway stood alone in the center of the stage, polished and placid under the spotlights. A stagehand was adjusting mic stands. No one else was inside. He paused, then kept walking. He didn't trust himself in that room anymore, not after the way they'd looked at him. Like touching the piano again would be a crime, like his calloused hands would infect the keys. Down the hall, he spotted Sophie tucked into a corner of the music wing, sitting on a bench with her bag curled against her side. She wasn't reading, wasn't listening to music, just thinking. He walked over. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then looked away too quickly. I didn't feel like playing today. You didn't feel like it yesterday either." "Yeah." She fiddled with the zipper on her sleeve, then added quietly, "It's not just Lena. The teachers treat me different now, like I'm in the way, like they don't want to say it, but I shouldn't be here." Evan felt something old stir in his chest. He sat beside her. "You should be here," he said. "You earned it, maybe, but it's different for her. She's not borrowing space." The phrase stuck. Borrowing space. He didn't answer right away, just looked down at his boots, still damp from mopping the courtyard. He wanted to tell her about the way the world worked, how it measured people by polish, not purpose. But she already knew. She'd been learning that since the first day she walked into this school, and they saw his name on her enrollment forms. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded cloth. Inside it was an old metronome, wooden, scratched. It still ticked. "Try with this tomorrow," he said. "It kept your mom steady when nerves tried to mess with her timing. It's not fancy, but it won't let you down." Sophie held it carefully, like it was made of glass. "Thanks," she whispered. Then, "Did you really work with those orchestras you talk about sometimes?" He paused. "I did, a long time ago." "Why'd you stop?" His jaw tensed, just a second too long. "Because sometimes," he said, "life takes your hands in a different direction." She looked like she wanted to ask more, but let it go. Later that afternoon, rehearsals restarted. Lena had been convinced, perhaps forced, to try again. Alaric stood near the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, watching the school's sound technicians hover like moths. No one acknowledged Evan sweeping the hallway nearby. But, from the double doors, he could hear it. The problem was worse now. 2 keys were dragging, low D and F. Not just sticky, unstable. The bass pedal pressure was uneven. The resonance shelf hadn't been repaired correctly. Harmonia had likely used surface stabilizers, not internal regulation. He glanced at his watch. 30 hours until the live broadcast. Inside the room, Lena pressed the keys again and again, her expression tightening. She whispered something to her assistant, who relayed it to the technician. The tech tapped a few things, shrugged, and stepped back. Lena stood up, walked to the wings, and sat alone. Alaric's jaw clenched, visible even from across the room. He barked something to the stage manager, who ran off down the corridor. Evan slipped away before the storm reached him. In the janitor's office, he opened the top drawer. His toolkit was there, untouched, waiting. But something else sat beside it now. Sophie's music journal. She must have dropped it earlier. He flipped it open and found a small drawing inside. A girl on a stage, spotlights, empty chairs, a shadowy figure near the piano. The figure wasn't the performer. It was someone watching, someone who believed in her, even if no one else clapped. He closed the journal and looked at the toolkit again. He wouldn't ask permission. He wouldn't announce anything. He'd just wait. And, when the moment broke, he'd be ready. Because fixing what mattered didn't always begin on the stage. Sometimes it began in silence, like a note only one man could hear. Lena Vale didn't show up for her scheduled rehearsal that afternoon. The stage was prepped. Cameras were ready. Even the floral arrangements had been fluffed and adjusted twice. But she never walked through the doors. Instead, her assistant whispered to the headmistress, and 15 minutes later, the rehearsal was marked as postponed for health reasons. Alaric Vale was not pleased. He stood near the back of the auditorium, arms folded tight across his chest. His jaw flexed rhythmically. The headmistress hovered beside him, offering placating phrases. Just a little stage anxiety, very normal at this age. The instrument's been tuned, of course. The instrument. That phrase again. Not the piano, not the music, the instrument. Like it was a background prop in a corporate presentation. Disposable, replaceable, external. Evan stood by the side doors, wiping down the window frames. Not assigned to be there, technically, but he kept finding himself nearby, like gravity. From this angle, he could see it all. The way Lena's absence had created a vacuum no one knew how to fill. The way the room's tension built around silence that should have been music. And the way Alaric didn't bother lowering his voice when he said, "If this doesn't run clean, heads will roll." The technician from Harmonia, sharp suit, confident smile, nodded and gestured toward the Steinway. "We've checked it 3 times, sir. It's structurally fine." Structurally fine. Evan could have laughed if it didn't hurt so much. That piano was lying, not visibly, not enough to embarrass itself in front of amateurs. But it would fail. And it wouldn't care about status or preparation or pristine tuning reports. It would simply fail because no one had listened deep enough to hear it crying for help. That night, Lena didn't eat with the others, Sophie noticed. She didn't touch her tray, she whispered to Evan as they passed the dining hall. She just sat there staring at the table. Evan nodded. She's probably scared to say what she hears. Sophie tilted her head. "You mean, in the music?" "No," he said quietly. "In the silence." The next morning, the headmistress sent out a memo. All non-essential staff were to avoid the auditorium for the rest of the week, unless specifically summoned. That included janitorial crews. The floors had already been polished. The cameras were being calibrated. No one wanted visual noise. Evan received the message on his work tablet as he cleaned the north stairwell. He stared at the words for a full minute, then turned off the screen. Later that day, he noticed a faint buzzing in the wall behind the library elevator, an electrical misfire that could short-circuit a light panel. He logged it in the system, but fixed it himself anyway. Quiet, efficient, like always. He found Sophie outside during her free period, sitting alone beneath the elm tree near the faculty lot. Her metronome ticked beside her, steady on a flat rock. "Practicing?" he asked, easing down onto the grass beside her. She shook her head. "Just listening." "To what?" She hesitated. "The space between ticks." He smiled. "That's the part most people miss." She glanced at him. "She's not okay, Dad." "No. She's going to panic when it matters." "Probably." "Is it the piano?" He didn't answer right away, then, "It's not helping." Sophie picked at a blade of grass. "You could fix it, right?" He exhaled through his nose. "Yes." "Then why don't you?" "Because some people would rather the instrument fail than admit the janitor was right." Sophie looked at him, serious. "Then let it fail." The silence that followed felt like a note neither of them could play. That evening, Evan lingered near the stage after hours. The cleaning crews were gone. The lights were dimmed. But the Steinway sat center stage, waiting like a trap with velvet teeth. He walked up to it, ran his fingers across the keys, and then slowly reached into his coat pocket, not for the full toolkit, not yet, but for one small key gauge, worn, brass-edged, and shaped like a tuning fork. He inserted it beneath the fallboard, twisted gently, and listened. There it was, that faint crack in harmonic balance. The instrument was lying to its technician, but it couldn't lie to him. He replaced the gauge and stepped back. Not tonight. Tomorrow, someone else would try to force the sound into obedience. And when it buckled, when silence swallowed performance in front of everyone, he'd be ready. Because that's when the man they ignored would finally become the man they needed. The next morning, Evan entered the building before anyone else. Not by accident, not by coincidence. He'd adjusted his shift, offered to handle HVAC checks before sunrise, filed a quiet request no one bothered to read. That's how systems like this worked. The higher up people sat, the less they noticed what moved beneath them. The auditorium lights were off when he slipped in. It was just him and the Steinway in the half-dark. He approached slowly, not like someone entering a stage, more like a man returning to a grave he never stopped mourning. He didn't speak. He didn't hum. He just pulled on his gloves and reached for the center pedal. There. The give again. Subtle. Precise. Predictable. He tested the lower D key. It caught, just for a second. Enough to stutter under pressure. The same pressure Lena would face when the broadcast aired and the cameras rolled and everyone expected her to be perfect. Evan set his work bag beside the bench and pulled out the thin roll of velvet cloth. Not the cherrywood case yet. This wasn't a full resurrection, just a quiet intervention. He removed the fallboard, flexed the frame, reached beneath the housing and made a micro-adjustment to the capstan screw alignment using a tool he'd hand-filed himself in 1998. The kind of correction no tech from Harmonia would have bothered with. Too subtle, too old school, too invisible. By the time the sun hit the upper windows, he had rebalanced 3 keys and adjusted tension on the sostenuto rod. Then he wiped everything clean and stepped away. He didn't sign anything, didn't log the repair. That wasn't the point. He wasn't here for credit. He was here for her, not Lena, Sophie, because Sophie was watching, whether she said it aloud or not. And Evan knew what it meant for a daughter to watch her father shrink. He wouldn't let that be the ending she remembered. At 10 a.m., Lena returned to the auditorium. Her assistant was with her, clutching a water bottle and a clipboard. No entourage this time, no performance crew. Evan passed them in the hallway as they entered. Lena barely glanced up, but her eyes flicked once toward the Steinway. Her brow tightened. Sophie watched from the far end of the corridor. "She's nervous," she said quietly. Evan nodded. "She's not wrong to be." "But she's walking in," Sophie added. "Even if she's scared." He smiled. "That's music." Inside, Lena sat on the bench for a long time before playing anything. The stage was empty. No cameras today. Just a private run-through with the headmistress and 2 faculty sponsors sitting 3 rows back. She placed her fingers over the keys, pressed down, paused, then began. It wasn't a recital. It was a test, a reckoning. Her pace was slow at first, halting, careful, then faster, then fuller. The piece climbed in volume, then plunged back down. She adjusted the pedals mid-run, shifting weight between foot and hand, expression and control. And when she hit the lower D, it didn't stick. It flowed. Her eyes widened just for a moment. She played on, flawlessly. In the shadows, Evan remained outside the main doors, pretending to wipe the brass handles. He didn't need to see. He could hear it. Every note, every pedal. The sound rang like it hadn't in weeks. Balanced, open, true. And then, laughter. Not loud, but real. From Lena. The headmistress looked up, startled. "Again," Lena said, more confident now. "I want to try it again." Later that day, Alaric arrived. He reviewed the footage from rehearsal with a frown that didn't shift, even as the others clapped quietly at the playback. "She's stable now," the headmistress said. Alaric didn't respond, just narrowed his eyes at the piano. "Who did the final tuning?" he asked. The technician from Harmonia shrugged. "We haven't touched it since Tuesday." Alaric looked at the headmistress. She blinked. "We assumed your team handled the adjustment." "No," he said flatly. "Someone else did." His eyes scanned the hall, his expression shifted just slightly toward suspicion, then toward the security camera mounted at the corner of the auditorium. "Pull the logs," he said. "I want to know who touched that piano." But Evan had already thought of that. He'd walked past the camera blind spot twice, and what he did had left no digital trace, only music. That night, Sophie found a note in her locker, written on clean staff paper, no name. Just 4 measures of a melody, hers. Adjusted slightly, made better, tuned, beneath it, one word. "Play." She smiled, and for the first time in a week, she walked back into the music room. And she didn't borrow space this time. She took it. Lena Vale didn't say anything the next morning, but she arrived early, earlier than her assistant, earlier than the staff. She stepped into the empty auditorium and ran her fingers over the keys like someone greeting an old friend she'd once feared. Then she played, just one chord, then another. No stumble, no hesitation. The instrument responded exactly how it should. Smooth, even, stable. From the corridor, Evan could hear the difference instantly. He was wiping down the windows again, pretending to focus on a fingerprint smudge that didn't exist. But his ears tracked every note like a heartbeat. She was testing, trusting. He allowed himself a quiet exhale. Then he heard footsteps behind him. "Excuse me?" The voice was soft, young. He turned. It was Lena, alone, no clipboard, no mask of polished professionalism, just a girl in a too large cardigan and scuffed ballet flats. "You're Mr. Marshall, right?" He nodded once. "That's me." She hesitated, glancing toward the auditorium door. "I think someone fixed the piano." He didn't answer. "I'm serious," she continued. "Something's different. The keys don't resist anymore, and the tone, it's not just in tune, it breathes now." Evan shrugged, keeping his tone even. "That's what a good piano does when it's listened to." She studied him, a crease forming between her brows. "Did you do it?" He didn't nod, didn't smile, but he didn't deny it either. Lena folded her arms. "You're not just a janitor, are you?" From behind her, Sophie approached slowly, holding her music journal to her chest. "Told you." Lena turned. "You knew?" Sophie shrugged. "Sort of. I figured it out." Lena looked back at Evan. "My uncle thinks I'm imagining things. He doesn't believe the instrument changed, but it did. It had to." Evan spoke quietly. "Sometimes when something breaks quietly, it takes someone quiet to fix it." Lena's voice lowered. "He wouldn't understand that." "No," Evan said. "He wouldn't." The surveillance footage from the auditorium didn't show anything. Alaric had the security team review it twice, then ordered a system diagnostics check. The logs were clean, but he didn't believe in clean, not when something slipped through his control. "Have the piano inspected again," he barked into his phone later that afternoon. "Externally, internally, every last string." "Yes, sir." "And background everyone who's been in that hall, especially staff." That evening, Evan returned to the practice wing, not to eavesdrop, not to fix, to watch. Sophie was playing again, not with fear, not even with full confidence yet, but with something approaching it. He leaned against the doorframe as she ran through her piece, the same notes she'd rewritten in the margins, the ones she'd adjusted with her metronome. And this time, she didn't stop halfway through. She made it to the end. When she looked up and saw him watching, she didn't flinch. She just smiled. In the auditorium, Lena's assistant returned with a clipboard and a frown. "They found some minor regulation adjustments under the sostenuto bar," she said. "The techs are saying it was old work, nothing recent." Alaric narrowed his eyes. "They're covering for someone." "I don't think so," the assistant replied. "Honestly, they're impressed. Whoever touched it knew exactly what they were doing." He turned away, jaw tight. "Get me the maintenance logs for the last 72 hours. "Yes, sir." By midday, the school's internal rumor mill had shifted. Someone in the music faculty mentioned that the piano sounded like it used to, back when Marshall was with the Philharmonic. It wasn't meant for the students to hear, but one student did. Derek Cho, sophomore, violinist, nosy. By the end of the period, he'd repeated it to 2 others. By the end of lunch, the story had evolved. Did you hear? The janitor used to work with orchestras, like real orchestras. Apparently he fixed stuff for world-famous musicians. No, for royalty. No, I heard he designed pianos. It didn't matter that the details were wrong. The shape of the truth was enough to spark curiosity. And curiosity led to quiet respect. Students who'd never made eye contact with Evan before now nodded as he passed. One even held the door. Sophie noticed. She didn't say anything, but her grip on her music journal softened. That night, Lena left something in the supply closet, a handwritten note folded and taped to a bench leg. "Thank you. You saved me more than you know." Beneath it, she'd drawn a tiny symbol, 3 parallel lines over a single key, the exact notes that had stuck, the ones that no longer did. Evan found it during his rounds. He read it twice, then tucked it into his pocket. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. The reversal hadn't come yet, but something had shifted, and now the billionaire was watching. By morning, Evan could feel it in the air, tension, tight and invisible, like a drawn wire waiting to snap. The school buzzed with preparation. The final gala rehearsal was set for that afternoon, and the broadcast team had already begun assembling scaffolding for lights and cameras in the auditorium. Alaric Vale arrived early, his black car slicing through the staff lot like it didn't belong there, which, of course, it didn't. The moment he stepped out, the headmistress greeted him, posture rigid, voice flatter than usual. "Everything's on schedule," she said. "Lena's rehearsal block is locked, and the donor walkthrough has been confirmed." Alaric didn't nod, didn't blink. "Security has the staff logs?" "They do." "And the janitor?" he asked. Her pause was microscopic. "He's kept to his assigned duties, no further interaction with the performance areas." Alaric scanned the courtyard, his eyes settling briefly on Evan, who was wiping down the brass railings near the east stairwell. He didn't wave, didn't frown. He simply watched. Evan didn't acknowledge him, but he felt it. That silent calculation. Inside the music wing, Sophie rehearsed alone. Again. Her shoulders were tighter than they had been the day before, her foot hovering above the pedal like it didn't trust the floor. She was supposed to be prepping for her final assessment next week, but the tension from the gala had trickled down. Everyone could feel it. Lena's presence had become a weight in the air, even if she wasn't in the room. Evan stood just outside, pretending to check an emergency light panel. He listened as his daughter played through a difficult run, hesitating only once, recovering with quiet grace. The notes came crisp, the pacing a little fast, but steady. Then she stopped, mid-bar. "Why do they act like she's the only one that matters?" Sophie asked without turning around. Evan stepped inside. "Because to them," he said, "she is. I mean, she's good, really good, but it's not just her playing, it's who she belongs to." "That's part of it," he agreed. "And She trailed off. He stepped beside her. "You're mine," he said. "And that's not a disadvantage." Sophie gave a half laugh, half sigh. "It feels like it." "Good," he said softly. "That means you're aware, and awareness is something they don't teach in these halls." She looked up at him. "You really tuned that piano, didn't you?" He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. "Lena knows," she added. "She told me you saved her performance." "She saved it. I just removed the excuse." Back in the auditorium, the headmistress finished setting the donor name cards on the front row seats. A floral team adjusted arrangements. A tech rehearsal began. Lena arrived last, quiet and alert. The moment she sat at the bench, Alaric entered from stage left and folded his arms. Lena glanced at him once, then focused on the keys. She played. Flawlessly. Alaric narrowed his eyes, his gaze never leaving the piano. When she finished, he clapped once. "Better," he said flatly. The headmistress smiled too quickly. "She's been incredible these last few days." He walked down the aisle, stopping beside the bench. "Stand up." Lena obeyed. Alaric lowered himself slowly, placing his fingers over the keys, pressing a few softly. He tapped the low D, pressed the sostenuto pedal, narrowed his eyes. He wasn't a musician, but he wasn't stupid. Something had changed. "Who touched this?" The room fell still. "No one from our list," the technician said carefully. Alaric stood. "Someone did something, and they're not being honest about it." From the corner of the room, Evan stepped into view. He wasn't supposed to be there, not during rehearsal, not during anything. But he stood there anyway, mop in one hand, and a simple, unassuming cloth draped over the other. "I cleaned the stage last night," he said evenly. "Maybe that's what you're hearing." Alaric turned fully to face him. The room held its breath. "Is that a joke?" "No." Alaric took one step forward. "You think I don't recognize precision when I hear it?" "I think," Evan said, "you're starting to recognize that you don't control all of it." The technician's eyes widened. The headmistress looked like she wanted to disappear. But Lena? She smiled, just faintly, and then turned back to the piano, sat down, and played the opening bars of her gala piece once more, smoother than ever, clear, ringing. There was no further comment, because the piano had answered for him. That evening, Evan returned to his office and unlocked the cherrywood toolkit. Inside was everything he had ever been. Every tool shaped to fit only his hands. Some of them hadn't been touched in years. Some still held the smell of the concert halls he'd left behind. He checked each one, polished them, wrapped them tight, then set the kit gently on the shelf, right where it could be seen. Not for show, for readiness. Because tomorrow the performance would be real. And when the piano's worth was tested in front of everyone, so would his. The gala morning dawned without clouds, but the mood at the academy was storm-tight. By 7 a.m., the courtyard buzzed with last-minute coordination. Velvet ropes had been unfurled, sponsor banners raised, catering trucks unloaded onto service ramps. Inside, the auditorium glowed under theatrical lighting. Warm gold spotlights aimed directly at the Steinway like it was a throne. Evan arrived through the side loading dock with a checklist in hand and the cherrywood kit wrapped in cloth under his arm. He wasn't scheduled to be anywhere near the performance wing today. But that didn't matter anymore. Security wasn't watching him. Not really. They were watching for things out of place, people out of uniform. And Evan? He was always in uniform. Always invisible. He stopped by the second-floor balcony overlooking the main hall. From there, he had full view of the stage, the seating, and most importantly, the sound technician setting up Lena's mic. The piano stood center stage, untouched since the final rehearsal. He exhaled. So far, it was holding. But Evan knew better than to trust silence. Pianos could behave for days, until humidity shifted, until the room filled, until nerves tightened a young player's pressure, until the moment it mattered most. And that moment was coming fast. At 8:30 a.m., Sophie passed him near the library stairwell. She was dressed neatly in her school performance uniform, hair pinned back, sheet music tucked under her arm. She didn't stop walking, but she did glance at him as she passed. "You're going to stay, right?" she asked without turning her head. "I'll be nearby," he said. She nodded once, almost to herself, then disappeared around the corner. Backstage, Lena sat in front of a mirror, silent as the makeup artist tried to pin her hair back. Her hands were folded in her lap, one thumb tapping nervously against her palm. Alaric entered without knocking. She met his eyes in the mirror. "You'll be fine," he said, voice low, controlled. "Just remember what you practiced." She didn't respond. "Stick to the piece, no improvising, no flourishes, the guests want tradition." Still silence. He stepped closer. "Do not let that piano become an excuse." Her lips parted slightly. "It's not the piano I'm worried about." Then she stood, adjusted her sleeves, and walked toward the stage entrance, without waiting for him. Evan moved toward the backstage corridor as the lights dimmed in the house. He timed it carefully, weaving between stage hands and rigging cables. He wasn't there to interrupt. He was there to watch, to be ready. He found a narrow gap between curtain panels just off stage right and settled behind it. From there, he could see Lena step into the light, applause rising around her like the room had been waiting for her breath to land. She gave a small bow. Saturday? Adjusted her bench. Her hand hovered over the keys. The room quieted. And then she played. The first run came smooth, steady, her tempo controlled, her shoulders relaxed. The sound from the Steinway was round, responsive, alive. But Evan's eye caught something, a tiny shift in her left foot. She was compensating, subtle, barely visible, but real. He watched her expression tighten. She hit the second progression. The bass register, just for a second, hesitated. A murmur ran through the pedal line like a skipped breath. Lena paused, too short for the audience to notice. But he noticed. Her right hand recovered, kept tempo. Her left followed, but more cautiously now. She was feeling it. The piano wasn't failing, but it was beginning to protest. The pressure, the lights, the humidity in the air, the sheer weight of Alaric's expectations looming from the front row. Evan reached down, unwrapped the cloth, revealed the cherrywood case. He didn't move, didn't step out. He just waited. Lena pushed through the second movement with mechanical accuracy. Her touch had become tight, cautious. The flow she'd shown in rehearsal was gone, and then it happened. The lower F stuck, just for a heartbeat, enough to blur the transition. A murmur ran through the crowd. Evan saw her fingers tremble. Her eyes flicked to the side. She was about to stop, but she didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes, drew a long breath, and pressed on. She began adjusting mid-performance, shifting phrasing, modulating pedal usage. She was compensating, working around the flaw, not just playing, but responding. She was playing like someone who understood the piano wasn't broken, just tired. Someone had taught her that. Someone had made her trust the instrument again. Evan stood motionless behind the curtain, heart steady. She finished the piece with a final high arpeggio, followed by 3 slow, deliberate chords. And then, silence. A beat. Then applause, rising, layered, full. But Evan didn't wait to hear the rest. He rewrapped the toolkit, turned, and disappeared through the side corridor. Backstage, Alaric stood and began making his way toward the wings, a strange look on his face. He didn't look at Lena. He looked at the piano. Suspicion again. But something else, too. Doubt. He reached out, pressed the same key that had choked earlier. It worked now. Clean. He stared at it, then turned slowly, as if retracing a question he didn't yet know how to ask. Alaric didn't return to his seat. He stood in the wings long after the applause died down, eyes fixed on the piano like it had defied him. He was a man used to answers, to control, to things performing when ordered and breaking when dismissed. And yet, the Steinway hadn't failed, not completely, not publicly, not in a way he could claim victory over or assign blame for. Instead, it had endured, not through engineering, not through his influence, through something else, someone else. He turned to the nearest staff member. "Where's the janitor?" The woman blinked. "Mr. Marshall?" He clocked out after cleaning the upper wing. Alaric narrowed his eyes. "Find him." But Evan was already gone, not far, just gone in the way that men like him knew how to be. He stood behind the loading dock, the cherrywood case tucked beneath his arm, his coat buttoned clean to the collar. No fanfare, no audience. He didn't need to see the rest. She had finished, and she had adapted. That was what mattered. He waited for the last truck to pull out before stepping onto the sidewalk and walking past the staff lot, where the echo of applause still seemed to linger like mist on cold pavement. Inside, Lena stood beside Sophie in the hallway near the rehearsal corridor. They didn't talk, not at first. Then Lena spoke, her voice quiet. "He didn't want me to change anything. He told me I'd embarrass him if I slipped." Sophie didn't reply. Lena continued, slower this time. "But I remembered something your dad said, about the notes between the notes. That's where the trust is." Sophie looked at her. "You trusted the piano." "I trusted that someone had listened when I couldn't." A long pause. Then Sophie added, "He does that a lot." By mid-afternoon, a murmur had started across the academy staff. Not from the gala, not from the donors, from the technicians. Someone had checked the internal camera feed outside the green room. A janitor had passed by just before the final rehearsal. Not unusual, except he had paused, just long enough to set something down beside the bench. No one saw what it was. No one could prove it was tampering. But the timing was too precise to ignore. The footage reached the assistant head of security. Within the hour, it reached Alaric. When Evan returned the next day for his regular shift, the building had changed. Slightly, subtly. The silence felt more curious, more aware. He moved like he always did, mop over one shoulder, gloves tucked under his belt, keycard clipped to his shirt. But the way people looked at him shifted, just enough to feel the weight of watching. Some nodded, some avoided his gaze altogether. A few paused, as if trying to line up what they thought they knew with what they'd just seen. He ignored them all, until he reached the music wing. The door to the auditorium was cracked open. Inside, Lena sat alone on the bench, running through soft chord progressions with no sheet music in front of her. Improvising, trusting. Evan didn't enter. He stood just outside, until Alaric's voice spoke behind him. "You fixed it." Evan didn't turn. "I preserved it." "You weren't authorized." "No." "You ignored direct instructions." "I did." "And you made my niece change her arrangement on a live performance without clearance." Evan finally turned, his expression calm. "Number?" "She made the change. I just removed the reason she'd fail." Alaric studied him. "That instrument is worth more than your salary for the next 10 years. It was worth the risk." Silence. Then, softer than expected, Alaric asked, "Why?" Evan considered his answer, then gave it without flourish. "Because when someone has their voice stolen by fear, it's your job to give it back quietly, without asking for credit." A pause. "Even if they never know it was you." "Especially then." Later that day, the headmistress received an envelope. Inside, no letter. Just a single folded sheet of paper. It was a performance review. From Alaric Vale, it stated, "Mr. Evan Marshall has demonstrated capabilities far beyond his role, including technical expertise, discretion, and sound judgment. I recommend we reassess his position." The headmistress read it twice before setting it down on her desk, hand over her mouth. That night, Evan returned to the empty auditorium one last time. The piano sat waiting in silence. He didn't play. He didn't even lift the lid. He just left a clean polishing cloth on the bench, tucked with care beneath the keys. A quiet sign of respect. A signature of sorts. No spotlight, just dignity. And tomorrow, he'd still be the janitor. But now they'd remember the hands that fixed what none of them could even hear breaking. The morning after the gala, Evan was scheduled to clean the north stairwell. He didn't make it there, not because of defiance, not because he skipped it, but because a printed notice taped to the maintenance board had reassigned his shift, temporarily it said, to instrumental support, music wing. No explanation, no signature. Just a box checked at the bottom with the word approved. He read it twice, then folded the paper and slid it into his back pocket. The hallway buzzed differently now. People nodded with something close to awkward respect. Teachers who had once brushed past him without eye contact now hesitated before saying hello. Some smiled, some didn't. But Evan moved the same way he always had, quiet, steady, unnoticed by design. When he reached the music wing, the double doors were already propped open. The Steinway sat in the center of the stage once again, bathed in soft morning light, as if nothing had happened. As if it hadn't been on the verge of failure just days ago. As if it hadn't been held together by the hands of someone they'd once dismissed. Waiting beside the bench was Sophie. She had a music book clutched to her chest and an unopened granola bar in her pocket. Her hair was slightly uneven from a rushed braid. Her shoes were dusty. She looked up as he entered, eyes searching his for confirmation. "You're staying here today?" she asked. He nodded. "Looks like it." She gave a small breath of relief. "Good," she said. "I want you to hear this." He leaned against the wall, arms folded, and watched as she took her seat at the piano. Her fingers trembled over the keys, but she pressed forward. The first note rang out, clear, confident. She played the melody she'd been refining for weeks, each bar etched into her memory not just by repetition, but by the quiet encouragement between them. And she didn't stop. Not once. Evan didn't speak until the final chord faded into the hush of the auditorium. Then, softly, he said, "That was yours." She nodded. "I didn't copy anything this time, not even the phrasing." "It shows." She stood. Do you think people will hear it? He looked at her, eyes steady. The ones who matter always do. Later that morning, Lena found him in the hallway, alone. She held out a black folder. Inside it, handwritten on sheet music, was the arrangement she'd performed during the gala, marked with her own notations, flourishes, and pedal shifts. I wanted you to have this, she said. He glanced at it, then back at her. You rewrote parts, he said. I had to, she answered. The piano didn't behave like it did in rehearsal. Something shifted. I wasn't sure if I could keep up. But you did. She nodded, then added, because I knew it was listening. Evan hesitated, then accepted the folder. Lena studied him for a moment more. My uncle wants to meet with you, she said. I figured. He won't say thank you, not directly. I'm not waiting on it. He's curious now. He doesn't like loose threads. Evan looked toward the stage. Then maybe it's time he sees where those threads lead. The meeting was held in the headmistress's office. Alaric was already seated when Evan entered. No entourage, no assistant. Just the two of them, and a silence thicker than the lacquered wood of the desk between them. You've been reassigned, Alaric began without preamble. I noticed. Do you accept it? I don't need a new title. It's not a title, it's access. You'll manage all stage instrumentation for the school, tuning, maintenance, emergency response. And the cleaning, you can delegate, or not. Up to you. Evan sat down slowly. This isn't about the piano anymore. No, Alaric said. It's about what you did under pressure and what you didn't ask for after. They sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, Evan spoke. You think this makes us even? Alaric's eyes narrowed slightly. Number. But it's a start. Evan nodded. Then we understand each other. Alaric slid a keycard across the desk. Full access, he said. Evan didn't reach for it yet. He just looked at the man in front of him and asked, Why now? Alaric didn't blink. Because I don't like being wrong, but I hate being unprepared even more. Evan picked up the card, slipped it into his coat. You're not the only one preparing. That evening, Evan returned to the piano alone. He unlocked the cover, adjusted the bench, and began to play. Not a recital, not a performance, just chords, memory. A little dust shaken loose from his fingers. The sound filled the empty auditorium like a secret exhaled at last. And in that moment, he wasn't a janitor, he wasn't a technician, he wasn't even a father. He was a man who had made something broken whole again, without needing anyone's permission to do it. By the end of the week, the story had spread beyond the school. It didn't go viral. There was no headline, no breaking feature. But it moved quietly, through parents who whispered during pickup, through donors who asked unusual questions at brunch, through students who carried rumors the way sheet music carries variations. Never exact, but always grounded in a recognizable truth. Did you know the janitor fixed the piano? They say he used to work with famous musicians. I heard he tuned for someone at Carnegie once. He doesn't even talk about it, just works like always. Evan, for his part, said nothing. He mopped the same halls. He polished the same windows. But his route now passed through the music wing without question. And when his gloved hand reached for the auditorium door, no one stopped him. No one dared. The Steinway had become his signature, not by ownership, not by ego, but by the simple fact that it was still standing. And people remembered what nearly happened to it. The school announced a small recital for the senior music students, a low-pressure event for family and faculty, scheduled 2 weeks after the gala. Lena had requested to perform again, but this time she wouldn't be playing a classic. She'd be debuting a new composition, one she wrote with help she never publicly acknowledged. But Sophie knew, and so did Evan. They found the draft one afternoon, left open on a practice bench, a handwritten dedication scribbled into the bottom corner, for the one who tuned what I couldn't find words for. That night, Alaric appeared at the auditorium, after hours. He walked in with his coat still buttoned, scarf tight at the collar. The space was dark except for one floor lamp shining over the stage. Evan was at the piano, hands still, tools laid out like a surgeon's instruments. He didn't turn when the billionaire stepped in. He continued tightening the last bracket on a dampener spring. Alaric approached quietly. You didn't sign the maintenance log. I wasn't asked to. Silence. Then, she told me you helped. I didn't touch her music. Not the notes, the courage. Evan finally looked up. She already had it, he said. She just needed someone who wasn't trying to prove a point. Alaric studied the piano for a long moment. You know, when her parents died, Lena wouldn't speak for nearly 6 months. I tried tutors, therapists, all the money in the world. Evan closed his toolkit. But what changed her, Alaric continued, was a broken piano in my sister's old house. She sat down and just played. Wrong notes, out of key, but she smiled for the first time. He paused. I've been trying to preserve that ever since. Evan didn't interrupt. Turns out, Alaric said quietly, preserving and controlling aren't the same thing. Evan offered a faint nod. Number? They're not. There was no apology, no dramatic moment of reconciliation, just the stillness between two men who understood the cost of trying to hold something too tightly. When Alaric left, he didn't say goodbye, but he looked back once just before the door closed, and Evan took that as enough. 3 days later, the recital began. The hall wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. Parents, staff, a few invited donors. The headmistress sat in the front row, her phone tucked completely away for once. Sophie sat beside her dad in the second row, program in one hand, the metronome he'd given her in the other. Lena was last to perform. She walked onto the stage wearing a simple black dress, hair unpinned, face free of makeup. Not to impress, not to dazzle, to be. When she sat, she took a breath, not short, not sharp, a steady, intentional breath. Then she played. The melody wasn't familiar. It didn't reference anything classical. It was slow in places, unsure, then bold and strange. But it was honest. A piece filled with spaces and silences and notes that leaned forward like they were reaching for something, just out of reach. When she finished, the audience didn't immediately clap. They breathed first, as if they needed to exhale what they'd just heard. Then the applause came, genuine, unforced. Alaric stood near the exit, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with an unreadable expression. And Evan? He didn't clap. He just smiled. Because he knew this wasn't the end. It was the inheritance of trust, of dignity, of knowing your worth without needing to announce it. After the crowd filtered out, Sophie lingered by the piano, tracing her finger along the edge of the bench. She looked over her shoulder. Are you ever going to tell them who you were? She asked. Evan packed his tools one by one. They'll figure it out when they're ready. And if they don't? He looked up at her, eyes steady. Then I'll keep showing them. Quietly. She grinned. I like that. He reached out, gently adjusted her collar, and nodded toward the practice wing. Your turn. She headed off without hesitation, and as the doors swung closed behind her, Evan sat down for just a moment longer beside the old Steinway. No spotlight, no audience, only quiet, and for a man who once tuned silence for a living, that was more than enough. Evan arrived at the academy an hour earlier than usual, not because of duty, because of habit. Because even after the promotion, after the reassignment, after the quiet stir of respect that had slowly replaced silence, he still felt most like himself when the building was asleep. He walked the halls with the same rhythm as before, same gloves, same keys. The only difference was the weight on his shoulder wasn't from being underestimated anymore. It was the weight of knowing exactly when to step forward and when to stay quiet. The music wing door was open. Inside, Sophie sat at the piano, hunched slightly, scribbling over a sheet of staff paper. Her feet swung just above the floor, toe tapping to a beat only she could hear. The sunlight from the upper windows fell across her hands. Evan leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a moment. She didn't look up. You're changing it again? He asked. She didn't stop writing. The last part felt like I was trying to be someone else. And now? Now it sounds like me. He smiled. That's harder than it looks. She paused, then turned to him. Do you miss it? What you used to be? He thought for a moment, then walked toward the stage and sat down beside her, resting his hands, calloused, precise, on the bench. I think I miss this more, he said. This? He nodded. Getting to choose what matters again, and who. She tilted her head. So what are you now? He looked at her, then at the piano, then back again. A father, a fixer, and occasionally a teacher. Sophie grinned. I think I like that title. The next week, a package arrived at the school with no return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, clearly old, of Evan, dressed in a tuxedo, standing on a concert hall stage beside a world-famous pianist. His hand rested casually on the edge of a Steinway. The inscription read, "To the only hands I ever trusted." The headmistress found it sitting on her desk with a sticky note. For your records. No one knew who sent it. But a week later, a small plaque appeared beside the Academy's grand piano, dedicated to the quiet ones who keep the sound from breaking, in honor of Evan Marshall. Lena Vale, back from a short trip overseas, stopped by the music wing one afternoon. She waited until Evan had finished checking the pedal tension on the upright. Then she handed him a slim envelope. Inside was an invitation, not to a performance, but to a collaboration. A foundation she was forming, private, under the radar. A fund for students with talent but no resources. Those overlooked because their last name didn't open doors. She wanted Evan on the board, not in title, in practice. You're the only person I know who understands what silence hides, she said. He didn't answer right away, but she saw the answer in the way he folded the letter neatly and placed it in the pocket closest to his heart. That evening, Evan returned to the auditorium. The lights were off, the chairs stacked for cleaning. He unlocked the cherrywood case one last time, not for repairs, not for crisis, but because Sophie had asked him to play something for her before she took the stage tomorrow. Just one piece, just for her. He sat down, pressed the first note, let it hang. Then he played, not for applause, not for recognition, but for memory, for presence, for every underappreciated thing that still held the power to carry someone forward. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. He repaired a wheelchair before the school dance, unaware the mayor was right behind him. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell us in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?